There are names that don't appear on maps. There are places where the soil doesn't accept graves. It only waits. If you are hearing this, it means the seal has weakened again. You were never meant to hear her name. Not because it was erased, but because it was hidden beneath things more ancient than language. They tried to bury her behind forged birth records and shuttered ledgers, but she waits in the seams of the earth like a rusted needle in the lung of time. Her name was Ruth Cahill, and in the winter of 1853, she saw something that no human was ever meant to see. The story begins with a ledger, a cracked black leather register locked inside a warped oak cabinet in the back room of the Armstrong County Historical Society. It smells like copper and mildew. The ink has bled like old wounds. If you brush the paper, it flakes to dust. And yet, her handwriting still moves, faint, alive, as if resisting the stillness of the page. The entry is brief. Just one date. December 19th, 1853. A place. Thornridge. A birth. It should have ended there. But Ruth never spoke of the child again. Not to the parish, not to the county, not even to her own sister. Except for one letter, hidden in the lining of a broken sewing box, discovered 80 years later in a farmhouse attic north of Mill Haven. The paper was brittle, folded into itself like something ashamed to breathe. It read, "It did not blink. It looked through me, not at me. I fear I have been perceived." That word, perceived, is underlined 3 times, as though she wasn't describing an infant, but a watcher. Ruth stopped practicing midwifery 2 weeks later. She abandoned her home, leaving the hearth still burning, bread still rising in the pan, and she walked west, barefoot, in the snow. Her body was never found. Her name was never crossed off the township rolls, as if she had not left, but been unwritten. But here's what no one tells you. Ruth Cahill wasn't the only thing born on Thornridge that night. It began as a hum, a low, chest-deep vibration that bled through the iron veins running under the hill. Miners spoke of their teeth aching when they passed near it. Lantern flames leaned sideways, and compass needles began their slow, impossible circles. The locals called it Breaktooth Hill. They believed the land there bit back, that drills cracked and horses refused its slope not from chance, but from refusal. And that winter, the Delcourts came, a French family of ironworkers, strangers with silent children and a mother already swollen with a 6th birth. They settled on that cursed ridge, where nothing grew straight, where snow turned red at the roots of the trees, and where the air itself seemed to bend around them like warped glass. That is where Ruth was called that night in 1853. She arrived at 3:27 a.m. By 4:09, the child had emerged, without a sound. No cry, no breath. Its eyes opened first, then its hands, twitching, patterned, like remembering something, and on its chest, etched not on the skin, but through it. Spirals, faint, red, warm. Ruth wrote, "It looked at me, not like a child, like it had been waiting." The mother refused baptism. The father carried the infant into a rear room and locked the door. No name was given, no church registered the birth, no census took the child's existence. And yet, in the decades after, people spoke of it. They said it never attended school, that it did not age as the others did, that it only appeared at night, standing motionless at the tree line as if listening to something under the soil, and they said the ground itself began to hum. You think this is folklore? You think this is just another superstition buried in the back pages of some rusting county archive? But ask yourself this: how does an entire township vanish from memory, while its ledgers remain filled with empty names? How do dreams align, identical years apart from strangers who never met, dreams of a narrow shaft breathing like lungs, and a child at the bottom, waiting? The Delcourts are gone. Their house rotted into the hill. Their mine is sealed under government order, marked only by a black square on the county map. No label, no path. But if you stand on the ridge on a windless night and hold your breath, you will feel it in your teeth, in your bones, a tone, older than breath. And somewhere below, where the spiraled shaft curves back on itself like memory, the girl who saw it first is still watching from the dark. There is a silence buried in Thornridge that isn't the absence of sound. It's the memory of something listening. When the first children began to vanish in the spring of 1867, no one connected it to the Delcourt mine. Not at first. They blamed wolves, river currents, the war-wounded drifters who haunted the rail spur at Millhaven Station. Anything but the ridge, but silence corrodes memory slowly, like water inside iron. And the parents who refused to speak of what they found, they all described the same thing. Spirals. Always spirals. A boy named Henry Moore, 10 years old, appeared chasing a stray dog near the tree line. His footprints stopped abruptly in a dry patch of red soil. No sign of struggle, no trail, no body. The dog returned 2 days later with spiral-shaped lesions across its flank. Not clawed, not cut, but burned in, as if something hot had written on its flesh. 7 days later, a girl named Ella Burr walked between 2 trees during a church picnic and never emerged. Witnesses said she smiled once and was gone. No sound, no trace. Just 2 small sticks pressed into the ground behind her, crossed, then twisted. And then John Thomas, 9 years old. He complained of a ringing in his chest during school. His teacher wrote, "He said the earth was humming, that it was calling to him. He was gone by the final bell." A search party combed the ridge. All they found was a circle of stones near the mine's edge, spiraled inward like a fingerprint pressed into the earth. The sheriff blamed runaways, the church blamed sin, and the county blamed nothing at all. Because to blame is to acknowledge, and to acknowledge is to become marked. But here is the truth they buried. That same winter, the Armstrong County Geological Board sent an expedition to the Delcourt property, led by Aldrich Rempel, a Civil War veteran and mining assessor known for his rationality, not superstition. He returned with eyes that no longer followed sound. The memo he submitted was locked under restricted materials. I've read it. Just 2 pages, brittle as moth wings. Listen to this. Shaft descends unnaturally, walls unnaturally smooth, no pick marks, spiral configuration not consistent with manual excavation, subsonic vibration detected, barometers failed, compass spin continuous, light distortion at depth, lantern halos widen without source change. One man reported seeing figures at the end of the shaft, no physical presence confirmed. Subject exhibited vertigo, aphasia, tremor. Conclude. Unsafe for continued use. Recommend site sealing, relocation of family, destruction of access road. It was signed February the 3rd, 1868. The county sealed the mine that spring. They burned the roadbed, redrew the property lines, and on the official survey map from 1870 onward, the entire area is marked only by a single black square. No label, no boundary, no legend. Just a scar in the paper. The Delcourts did not leave. They did not fight the order. They simply stayed. Silent. Their smoke still rose in winter. Their boots still printed the snow, but they spoke to no one, and no one, not even the census men, crossed their fence line again. Yet something else didn't leave either, because silence is not the same as absence. Silence remembers. And within months of the sealing, a strange sickness began to ripple outward from Thornridge. Cows would not graze within sight of the old forge. Children woke with bleeding noses and spoke in deep, hollow tones their parents did not recognize. Lanterns burned low near the tree line, no matter how new the wick. Clocks drifted, needles spun, and scattered across the township, unrelated families began to report the same dream. A narrow path of stone, pulsing like lungs, breathing, humming. And at the bottom of the spiraling shaft, a child. Not theirs, and yet unmistakably bearing their faces. You can dismiss this. Call it hysteria, folklore, superstitious contagion. The Pennsylvania Folklore Archive still holds 67 such accounts filed between 1864 and 1869, all from families living within 3 miles of Thornridge. Different hands, different towns, identical words. The walls moved. The stone was listening. It was humming. Understand this. There are places on this earth that do not belong to us. They are older than blood, older than bone, older even than breath. They only tolerate our presence until we become receptive. The Delcourts were not cursed. They were chosen. Or perhaps they were opened. And the girl who saw it first, Ruth Cahill, may not have run at all. She may have simply heard it and followed. In 1871, a man named Elias Cohn wandered onto Thorn Ridge by accident. At least that's what the record says. But some accidents are invitations wearing coincidence like camouflage. Cohn was a hymnographer, a collector of sacred songs, raised in the rigid Moravian choral tradition and known for his perfect pitch. He had spent the previous decade riding through the Appalachian interior, transcribing oral hymns from coal camps, river hamlets, and dying forest parishes. He believed sound preserved memory long after paper surrendered to rot, and yet Thorn Ridge broke him. Not with violence, with pattern. His journal, recovered from the Swarthmore Musicological Library, is meticulous until the page marked March 14, 1871. There, the script begins to stutter, and what it describes does not fit inside sanity. Children in a circle, drawing spirals in red clay, singing, no adults visible. Continuous tone, no stanza, no refrain. Each child joins where the last leaves off. Not harmony, not counterpoint. Patterns, not notes. His shorthand collapses after that line. Strokes become jagged, erratic arcs like claws dragged across staff paper. A forensic musicologist decades later said the markings resembled logarithmic spirals, not musical notation. Her remark still haunts me. If sound had a geometry, this is what it would look like. It doesn't follow rhythm, it follows expansion. Cohn described dizziness after only 5 minutes, a high pressure behind his teeth, a taste like copper, and the uncanny sensation that his own thoughts were no longer arriving from inside his mind, but being whispered from behind it. He fled by dawn, yet when he reached Kittanning 3 days later, he mailed a wax cylinder of the children's song to an Assos C8 in Bethlehem. That cylinder is now locked inside the Pennsylvania State Sound Archive. It has not been played since 1961, because the last time they played it, 2 technicians convulsed. One clawed his own mouth bloody, trying to pull something out of his jaw. The other collapsed, muttering, "It's remembering me," before slipping into a fugue state that lasted 6 hours. When he woke, he could recite no words, only hum a rising spiral of tones, the same ones Cohn transcribed. The archivist's note reads simply, "Playback-induced mild convulsions, aphasia, visual after-images, and what the technician described as the memory of a house I have never seen. Cylinder sealed per Directive 19B. Cohn was not warned. No one told him what he had captured. He wrote to his brother Tobias weeks later. The letters, brittle and brown, survive in the private Cohn estate. I cannot stop hearing them. The pitch shifts with the sun. I've begun sketching the spirals again, though I do not remember beginning. My right hand moves on its own. They are inside my memory, like I've known them longer than I've lived. And again, there is something in the clay where they sang. It was warm, even in snow. When I placed it by the hearth, it cracked and left marks like handwriting, but not in any language I know. The clay sample was never recovered. The sketches were never found. Cohn disappeared from public record in May of 1871. His belongings were discovered in an empty inn room in Ford City. The bed was unmade, the window ajar, the wax cylinder gone, and on the mirror, drawn in soap, a single spiral. No body, no struggle, nothing left, except silence that hummed when you stood still too long. After Cohn's death, something began to spread, like a melody carried by wind, except this one carried remembering. Children in nearby towns began to sing in their sleep, not lullabies, not words, just a rising arc of 4 tones, always the same, always incomplete. Parents described them as too steady, too deliberate, like the song was using the child, not sung by them. One father, Dr. Emil Brandt, a retired dentist from Elderton, recorded his daughter's nocturnal singing on a wax disc, and slowed it down on a mechanical turntable. He expected nonsense. What he heard froze him. She was repeating a sequence of tones that mapped perfectly onto the jagged arcs in Cohn's journal, a spiral, unfurling, and beneath the tone, almost inaudible, a second sound. Not a voice, a resonance, like the deep groan of iron cooling too slowly, like a forge breathing in. Dr. Brandt wrote only one line in the margin of his transcript. "This is not melody. This is entry. Understand what that means." It was not music. It was a door. And every time the children sang it, they opened it a little wider. This is why Ruth Cahill fled. This is why the Delcourt stopped speaking. And this is why the county buried Thorn Ridge under black squares and silence. Because the spiral is not just a pattern. It is an invitation. And once it enters your mind, it does not leave. It waits. Waiting is all it has ever done. Dreams are the first to betray us. They are where the mind rehearses what the body is not yet allowed to remember. By the winter of 1872, the dreams had spread far beyond Thorn Ridge. They began in the children. Always the children, not just the Delcourts, whose names had dissolved from census rolls entirely by then, but children in Elderton, Ford City, Worthington, even as far south as Leechburg. Families who had never seen Thorn Ridge, who had never heard of Ruth Cahill or her ledger, began reporting the same night terrors. And yet the dreams were not terrifying. Not at first. They were quiet, mesmerizing. Like being called gently down a hallway you didn't remember building. The descriptions were identical, a narrow spiral shaft. Walls of stone pulsing like lungs, the air warm, metallic, a faint humming that passed through the bones, not the ears, and at the bottom, a child. Spirals burning faintly across their chest like embers under skin, not breathing, just waiting. One mother wrote in her letter to the county folklore board, "I saw my own son there, but older, taller. He turned his head before I reached him, like he'd been expecting me." Another said, "He looked at me as though I was the one who had been born." The dreams never varied, never changed, even among children who did not know each other, even among adults eventually. Farmers, shopkeepers, school teachers, all of them walking the same winding descent, all of them hearing the same sound. The county denied the reports. The church called it contagion, but contagion doesn't leave physical marks. Several of the children began to develop faint, spiraling discolorations along their collarbones and sternum, not raised, not vascular, warm to the touch, like heat signatures of something not yet emerged. Doctors couldn't explain it. They called it mineral dermatitis, though no samples matched anything in the county's geological register. Worse were the changes in behavior. Children who had been quiet became withdrawn. Those who were bright grew distant, distracted, humming to themselves under their breath in a pitch too low for adult ears, and they all began to draw the same shape. Spirals, endless, looping spirals, in clay, in dirt, on walls, even carved into their own desks at school as if their hands moved without their will. A teacher named Abigail Wren tried to intervene. She wrote in her journal, the pages now cracked with age in the Clarion Education Archive. They do not blink while they hum. Their jaws tremble slightly, as though something is vibrating inside their teeth. When I try to stop them, they only tilt their heads, as though listening to someone behind me. Wren left her position in March of 1872. Her replacement lasted 6 weeks before vanishing on her walk home. Her boots were found upright on the path, standing as though she had simply stepped out of them. In the dirt beside them, a spiral traced in ash. This was when the county sent men back to Thorn Ridge. Secretly, at night, with no records filed, they did not return. Only one journal surfaced, years later, smuggled out of the Armstrong Historical Commission by a clerk named Howard Bryn, before he disappeared in 1903. Its pages were water-damaged and blackened at the corners, but legible enough. Lower chamber walls smooth, spiral cut continuous, no sign of tool marks. Lanterns dim at depth. Clocks fail. Compass spins, teeth ache, sound not heard but felt in ribs, saw figures at periphery, not human, watching. Shaft feels alive, stone flexed under my hand. Bryn wrote one last line at the bottom of the page, slashed in frantic strokes. It knows who listens. Understand this. The spiral was no longer simply being seen, it was seeing back. It had moved beyond soil and ore and humming iron. It had entered thought, memory, dream. It was wearing the minds of children like masks, and those children were beginning to answer. By the spring of 1873, the children had stopped speaking in words. They still opened their mouths, but language had gone. What emerged instead were tones, low, steady, perfectly matched, as though something beneath their lungs had seized the machinery of their voices. Parents described it like this. They hummed together, even when apart. Different rooms, different streets, but the sound is one. Doctors dismissed it as hysteria, a psychogenic echo. They tested the children's hearing, their throats, their cognitive faculties, all normal, except for one thing, their pulses. Every child's heartbeat had slowed to exactly 44 beats per minute. Identical, relentless, a rhythm not of flesh, but of metronome. They weren't sick, they were synchronizing. And when they gathered, as they began to at twilight without instruction or agreement, the air itself changed. Witnesses reported that lantern flames thinned and pulled sideways. Clock hands stuttered, teeth ached. Metal objects left on the ground vibrated gently, as though something beneath the soil was breathing in. No one dared approach them closely. Those who did not remain unchanged. A miller named Samuel Jar stood at the edge of the glade where they had gathered, sketchbook in hand. He returned pale, shaking, eyes wide and unfocused. He never spoke again, but in his book, now stored in a sealed vault at the Armstrong County Historical Society, he had drawn the scene from memory. 12 children, standing in a perfect spiral, hands at their sides, mouths open. From each, he had drawn faint lines rising upward, not smoke, not breath, something else, something straight, rigid, like invisible threads being pulled taut toward the sky, and between those lines was nothing. A space so black the ink has not faded in over 150 years. Jar wrote only one phrase beneath the sketch in letters so tight they carved the page. They are not singing, they are remembering. That was when the elders of Millhaven gathered to discuss what had become of their children, and one man, Reverend Amasa Hale, proposed what no one else would say aloud. Perhaps they are no longer ours. You must understand what he meant. Hale was not a man of superstition. He had fought in the war. He had watched men die on the field at Antietam and never blinked. But this terrified him. He told the assembly that he believed the children were becoming conductors, vessels for something older than human thought, something seeded beneath Thorn Ridge before the first pick struck stone. His words were stricken from the minutes, but he wrote them again, privately, in his journal. We are not witnessing possession. We are witnessing recollection. They are not being filled. They are being restored. And that word, restored, spread like infection, because some parents began to whisper that maybe their children were not lost, but elevated. They began allowing them to gather, to hum, to draw spirals in the soil until their fingernails bled. They offered no resistance when the children stopped eating for days at a time. They said, they are becoming what they were meant to be. And in a sense, they were right, because by midsummer the children had stopped aging. Their hair grew, their nails lengthened, their bones measured taller in the doctor's ledgers. But their faces did not change, not one line, not one wrinkle, not one blink. They were not growing, they were holding, as though time itself had caught in their throats like a swallowed nail, as though they were waiting for something, or someone. And that's when the animals began to die. Barn cats were found with their jaws shattered as though struck from the inside. Crows dropped from the sky with their beaks locked open, throats scorched. Horses collapsed mid-gallop, legs folding neatly as if commanded to kneel, eyes wide and blind. Veterinarians found no disease, but they all shared the same final expression, not pain, Not fear, recognition. It was as though they had seen something, and remembered. And here is the most forbidden truth of all. The humming did not come from the children. It came from beneath them, through them, as if they had become tuning forks for the earth itself. A subterranean resonance, a note struck in iron before human hands existed, a voice, older than voices, rising through the soft machines of their bodies. It was not speaking words, it was aligning them, preparing them. For what? No one dared ask, because some part of them already knew. By autumn of 1873, the children had become something no language could name. They no longer gathered randomly. They moved with purpose now, converging at dusk in precise numbers, at precise intervals, as though answering to a clock no one else could hear. They would arrive barefoot, unblinking, and form perfect spirals in the clay fields at the edge of Thorn Ridge. Not sloppy, childlike circles, mathematical spirals, exact logarithmic curves, each step spaced by ratios too precise for chance, too elegant for instinct. They wound here building something. Farmers who watched from their windows at night reported that their livestock refused to look toward the ridge. Cattle would turn in their stalls until their necks strained. Dogs whimpered at corners, chickens stopped laying entirely, and every night the children's spirals grew larger, perfect arcs etched deeper and deeper into the red soil like grooves on a colossal record. Some parents tried to drag them home. They said their children's skin was warm like fever, but their pulses were cold, their eyes still and hard as cooled iron. One father, Jonah Wills, struck his son across the face to break the trance. The boy did not move, did not react, did not even blink. He only opened his mouth, and the sound that came out was not his. Jonah described it later in a letter that he never mailed, found years later folded into his wallboards like contraband. It was not a scream, not a cry. It was metal cooling too slowly. It was the sound of nails remembering the tree. It rattled my teeth and I wept. He looked at me with my own face as though I had disappointed him. Jonah's son vanished the next night. All they found were his boots, neatly placed in the center of the newest spiral. Still warm, this was when Reverend Hale broke. The same man who had first whispered the word restored now declared that Thorn Ridge was not birthing saints, but structures. That the children were not being possessed by something alive, but by something built. The spiral, he wrote in his final sermon draft, is not an image, it is a framework. They are not being filled, they are being assembled. He never delivered that sermon. The draft was found on his desk, ink smeared, chair overturned. The church bell rang once that night, though no one had pulled the rope. Hale was never seen again, but the children continued. Soon their voices began to merge, not like a choir, like a single voice split across many throats. Each child emitting a different pitch, but together producing a harmonic structure so complex it bent the air like heat. Witnesses reported their vision warping, lantern light bending into rings, shadows collapsing inward. Teeth chattered, eardrums itched from the inside. A blacksmith named Thomas Reeve approached them once, clutching a Bible in one hand and a revolver in the other. He collapsed 10 feet from the outermost ring, his skin blistered in concentric circles from the inside out. When he woke, days later, he was blind. He told his wife only this: "They are singing in the shape of something. I saw it. It is bigger than the sky." He stopped speaking after that, stopped sleeping. He scratched spirals into the floorboards of his house until his fingernails split, and then he walked into the river fully clothed. His body surfaced 18 miles downstream, curled like a fetus, his jaw fused shut. By late November, the spirals had grown wide enough to be seen from the ridge summit. 5 perfect rings carved into the soil, each filled with black clay that hadn't been there before, and each humming faintly if you pressed your ear to the ground. The earth itself was beginning to respond. Soil analysis from that winter, the few samples that escaped the county purge, show iron content triple the baseline, forming fine, thread-like filaments that glimmered under lamplight. Microscopists noted they moved, not under air currents, not from vibration, but in rhythm, as though pulsing to a distant signal. It was no longer clear where the children ended and the soil began. Their bare feet left no prints now. They stood for hours without shifting, without blinking. Some parents whispered that their children were hollow now, that if you cut them open you would find not blood, but wire. None dared test it. Because by then the children were no longer simply in the spirals, they were becoming the spirals. Their voices wound around each other in tightening arcs. Their hair began to align, every strand lying flat like spun metal. Their shadows twisted subtly clockwise when they stood still, as though light itself was caught in their orbit. It was not music anymore, not ritual, not possession. It was architecture. Living architecture, assembling itself out of memory, bone, and resonance. And the shape it was building was not meant to stay still. It was meant to rise. By January of 1874, Thorn Ridge was no longer still. The land itself had begun to shift. At first it was subtle. Farmers awoke to find fence posts tilted slightly inward overnight, as though the soil had softened beneath them. Tools left in sheds were found hours later a few feet closer to the ridge, as if dragged gently across the floor by invisible hands. Plumb lines hung at crooked angles. Well water rose without rain. Roots twisted out of the ground like veins searching for a pulse, but it escalated. By February, entire trees had begun to cant inward toward the center of the spiral fields. Massive oaks that had stood straight for centuries now leaned at impossible angles, their trunks bending without cracking, their branches combed toward a single unseen point like compass needles toward an invisible north. Locals described the ridge as breathing. They meant it metaphorically at first, but soon even that metaphor began to fail, because the earth started pulsing. Soft, rhythmic undulations, subtle enough to doubt at first, until dishes rattled, lantern glass rang, and cellar stones groaned in their mortar. It was not earthquakes. Seismographs in Pittsburgh showed nothing. And yet those who stood in the spiral fields at dusk claimed to feel something passing up through their legs into their ribs, a slow thudding that was not their heartbeat. And when they placed their hands to the soil, they swore it was warm. Children stood in those fields night after night, unblinking, arms loose at their sides. They hummed, mouths barely open, their voices threading together into a single continuous tone that never rose, never fell, just held. And the ground listened. It listened. Then came the first rupture. It was March 3rd, 1874. A shepherd named Nathan Crail reported hearing a metallic moan from beneath the ridge as he tended his flock. The sound deepened, stretched, until the earth split silently under his feet. No quake, no tremor. Just a clean spiral fracture in the red clay, as though the soil had unwound like a spring. From that wound rose heat, a dry, copper-scented vapor that shimmered like forge smoke. And embedded in the split clay were glints of something dark and lustrous, not ore, not stone. Thin filaments, hair-fine, braided into patterns like woven script. Crail reached to touch them. He collapsed before his hand landed. Neighbors found him hours later, convulsing gently, whispering nonsense syllables. Except they weren't nonsense. They were the same four tones the children had been humming, perfect, unbroken, looping, as though his mind had been rewritten mid-thought. He never recovered. He spent the rest of his life sitting silently on his porch, eyes unfocused, lips moving soundlessly, as if still humming. When he died in 1891, the undertaker noted something strange. His teeth were fused to his jawbone, as though welded from within. And that night, something even more impossible happened. The spiral fields moved, not shifted, turned. A cartographer named Ellery Nash, surveying the region for a new railway spur, took measurements at dusk and again at dawn. Between those two readings, the 5 massive spiral grooves in the soil had rotated 3 degrees clockwise, perfectly, as if carved into a colossal buried gear. The children stood at their center, barefoot in the frost, unshivering. They did not blink. Their shadows curled behind them like smoke dragged in slow orbit. Nash fled before finishing his report, but in the margin of his notebook, he scrawled one final line. "They are not worshipping it. They are powering it." The county buried his report. The newspapers were silent, but something irreversible had already begun. The spirals had stopped being drawings. They had become joints, moving parts in something vast and hidden beneath the ridge. And each hum from the children tightened it. Each tone they sang was not song at all, but talk, rotating something that should never have been turned. The earth was no longer resisting. It was cooperating. And here is the truth they feared most. The spiral is not alive. It does not live in the way we understand life. It does not breathe. It does not eat. It does not sleep. It remembers, and what remembers can awaken. And now, it was beginning to. The breach came quietly. No thunder, no collapse, no apocalypse of stone and dust, just silence. A silence so absolute that sound itself seemed to recoil. It began on the night of April 17, 1874. The sky over Thorn Ridge went still. No wind, no crickets. Even the river a mile east stopped lapping its banks, as if the water itself was holding its breath. And then, the children walked. Witnesses from 3 townships reported seeing them leave their homes at once, without prompting, without sound, moving as one body in the moonlight. Dozens of them, some barefoot, some half-dressed from their beds. Their eyes were open but unseeing, their jaws trembling faintly as if vibrating from the inside. They converged on the spiral fields. Parents tried to stop them. They couldn't. One father locked his door and tied his son's wrists to the bed frame. At 2:14 a.m., the boy was gone. The ropes lay loose on the sheets, neatly coiled in a spiral. By 3 o'clock a.m., over 50 children stood in the fields, perfectly still. Their voices rose, not as melody, as structure. Each tone braided into the next like strands of wire twisting into a cable. Their mouths moved in unison, their chests glowed faintly red where the spirals marked their flesh. The ground beneath them trembled, not from quake but from response. The soil darkened. The spiral grooves deepened of their own accord, widening like pupils. The black clay inside them began to shift, ripple, then lift in slow coils like smoke made of iron. And from the center of the largest spiral, the earth opened. No explosion, no tearing, just a slow, deliberate parting of the ground, as though stone remembered how to unseal. What rose from that wound was not rock, not soil. It was something else. Filaments, thousands of them. Thread-like, metallic, glistening like oil on water, rising from the ground in a perfect spiral column, spinning silently, weaving themselves upward with mechanical grace. They twined around each other like roots, or veins, or memory assembling its own skeleton. One witness, a schoolteacher named Miriam Vale, described it in her hidden journal like this. It was building itself from the earth as if the ground were only its sheath. I knew I was looking at something that remembered being whole, something ancient, something patient. The column grew taller than the tallest oak. The air around it bent inward like heat above a forge. Shadows warped, lanterns turned black, and the children did not move. Their hum intensified, tightening until it became inaudible, felt only as a pressure behind the eyes and deep in the teeth. Several adults who approached collapsed, bleeding from the ears, their pupils dilated into spirals. One of them, Reverend Hasker, was heard muttering before his body seized. "It's not coming from below, it's coming from before." Then the filament column unfurled, not outward, inward, folding into itself in impossible geometry, collapsing while rising, like a staircase that had forgotten which direction was up. And when it stopped, it was gone. Vanished. No sound. No debris. Only 5 perfect rings left burned into the soil, glowing faintly red like iron cooling too slowly. The children fell silent. They turned their heads all at once to face the same point on the horizon, the same exact angle. And then they walked home. Not ran. Walked. Not a single one spoke. Not one blinked. They lay in their beds and closed their eyes, their faces slack and serene, their pulses slow and synchronized. By dawn, the spiral fields were cold, the air normal, the ground still. But everyone who stood near them said the same thing. They could feel it, not in their ears, but in their bones. Something was still humming under the silence, something vast, something waiting, and every clock in Millhaven read the wrong time. Each one had stopped at exactly 3:14 a.m., and each one had stopped not with their gears jammed, but wound backward. Time itself had paused to watch. By summer of 1874, Thorn Ridge had gone still again. The spirals lay dormant, etched like scars into the earth, blackened and dry. No birds nested there, no insects stirred. Even the wind avoided it, splitting around the ridge as though diverted by an invisible wall. And yet the Kautuo beat was worse than the humming had been, because everyone who stepped within those rings felt the same thing, the ground, watching them. The children no longer gathered there. They no longer hummed or sang or spoke at all. They simply lived, or seemed to. They rose at dawn, walked in straight lines to their homes' thresholds, and stood in the sunlight with their eyes closed as if absorbing it. They did not eat. They did not blink. They did not cast shadows until noon. Parents stopped speaking about it, not from shame, from fear of summoning it by name. They performed their routines in hollow silence, feeding meals the children would not touch, dressing bodies that never grew thinner, never warmer, never aged another day. Doctors were brought quietly from Pittsburgh. None returned twice. Their reports, now locked under seal in the Armstrong County Medical Annex, are thin as onion skin and reek faintly of ozone. One reads, "Subjects appear biologically stable but metabolically inert, pulse irregular, pupils reactive yet unblinking, skin firm, cool, faint static charge at touch, behavior rote, no apparent cognition, yet will follow verbal instructions if phrased as imperatives. Language comprehension intact, no spontaneous speech, no affect, no decay." Another wrote, "It is not that they are unwell, it is that they are finished." And that is what terrified the parents most. Their children were not dying. They were complete, closed systems. One mother, Anne Lurick, described in her hidden journal how her daughter would sit at the window for hours without shifting, her lips parted slightly as if listening to something distant, inaudible. Once, Anne crept close enough to hear what she feared she would. She pressed her ear to her daughter's chest. There was no heartbeat, just a faint ticking, like a pocket watch buried in cloth. Anne never wrote again. Within months, the township began to dissolve. Families left silently, leaving furniture behind, tools still on tables, bread half-kneaded in bowls. Shops shuttered, the church doors rotted from their hinges without being locked. Post ledgers show dozens of forwarding addresses scrawled in frantic ink, often scratched out and replaced, as if their writers couldn't decide where they were going, only that they had to go. By December of that year, fewer than 20 families remained. And then, in February of 1875, the last census man came. His name was Arthur Dobb. His ledger is the final federal record of Mill Haven's existence. He walked the township alone for 3 days. He found the fields empty, the houses gutted, no smoke from chimneys, no prints in the snow. But on the second day, he reached the Delcourt homestead. The forge was cold, the roof half collapsed. But inside, he found something waiting on the soot-black floor. 6 child-sized silhouettes, outlined not in dust or soot, but in something metallic, dark and glossy like oil. Perfect spirals, etched where their chests would have been. And when he stepped closer, he heard it, a faint hum coming from beneath the floorboards, not loud, not urgent, just steady, patient, endless. Dobb fled that night. He never finished his ledger. He abandoned his post and wandered west, growing increasingly erratic, muttering about clocks and teeth. He died in a rail yard in St. Louis 6 years later, clutching a rusted pocket watch filled not with gears, but with red clay. No official record of Mill Haven appears after that. The township name vanishes from maps by 1876. The land parcel is marked vacant on Armstrong County plats from 1878 onward. The spiral fields are labeled simply sequestered. And the children? No graves, no obituaries, no names, as though they had never lived, as though they had been erased. Not from the world, but from time. And yet, if you stand on Thorn Ridge today, where the earth is black and glassy as cooled iron, and you press your ear to the soil, you will hear it. A slow, even ticking, not fading, not slowing, just waiting. Waiting for the body to become receptive again, waiting for the spiral to remember the shape it once wore. Waiting, for the world to blink. There is a reason it chose a child. A child sees without filters, before language teaches them what not to notice, before memory edits the impossible into silence, before the world builds walls inside their minds to keep the ancient things out. The spiral needed someone whose mind had not yet hardened, someone open, someone unarmored, someone who could see it without collapsing. That someone was the infant born on Thorn Ridge in the winter of 1853, the one Ruth Cahill delivered, the one who never blinked, the one who looked at her as if measuring her. Understand this, it was not born from her, it was born through her. Ruth saw that truth just for a moment, and it undid her. She didn't flee because she was afraid of what it was. She fled because she realized what it wasn't. It was not human. It had never been. It was memory, wearing flesh for the first time, a seed, planted in blood, so it could grow roots through the lattice of the human mind. That was always the purpose of the humming. It was never sound, it was instruction. The spiral was teaching the body how to become receptive, how to loosen the boundaries between bone and thought, how to rewire the mind into something that could carry what it once carried before there were even bodies to hold it. That's why the children synchronized, why their hearts slowed, why their voices merged into a single unbroken tone. They were not being possessed, they were being formatted, and once they were empty enough, the spiral filled them, piece by piece, not with flesh, with memory, with the pattern itself. That is why they stopped aging, why they stopped casting shadows, why their pulses became ticks instead of beats. They were no longer alive, they were archives, living vessels of something older than biology, older than language, older than time. A network, rebuilt in bone and blood, a storage system wearing the shape of children, and once they were complete it did what it had always been waiting to do. It erased the evidence. Millhaven did not fade. It was deleted, cut from the fabric of chronology, excised like infected tissue from history's body. The people who left it forgot it. Their descendants never spoke of it. Even the soil lost its name on the county plats. That is why you've never heard of Thorn Ridge, why you will find no graves, no photos, no ruins, because you were not supposed to, because it is not past. It is dormant, and dormant does not mean dead. It means patient. Patient the way iron is patient, waiting centuries under riverbeds for a hand to dig it up. Patient the way old songs are patient, lingering in the bones of wood until someone plays them again. Patient the way an idea waits for a mind soft enough to accept it. There are whispers in certain archives, off-record remarks by field agents, archivists, even soil analysts who vanished mid-career, that Thorn Ridge is not unique, that the spiral was not born there. It only surfaced there because the iron veins ran close to the skin of the world. There are other sites, older, deeper, waiting for the next receptive body. And here is the part that should keep you from sleep. They say the spiral never truly vanished from Thorn Ridge. They say it just sank back down into the seam between stone and time. They say if you walk there under a windless moon and stand in the dead center of the black field, you will hear it again. Not in your ears, in your ribs, in your teeth, in your thoughts. A low hum, rising, winding, curling behind your eyes like smoke. And when it reaches your chest, if you are very still, if you do not blink, you will feel something inside you. Turn. That's how it starts. That's how it always starts. Not with possession, with remembrance. You do not become part of it. It becomes part of you, and then, without knowing why, you will look at the world as Ruth Cahill once did, and you will realize what she realized, that none of this is evolution. It is a reply to something older than breath, older than bone, older than light, something that was here before us, and intends to be here after. And if you're hearing this now, if the hum has always reached you, it has found a new body. It has found you. Do not move. Do not breathe. Do not blink. Just listen. And try to remember what you were before you were human.